A European court recently ruled that gene-edited foods will be treated the same way that Europe treats genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. That means new crops, such as edited versions of soybeans and wheat that are touted as, quote, health-focused innovations, will face safety and labeling regulations in many EU countries. How should Canada proceed in this new food biotech landscape? Well, let's get into this. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, Lucy Sherritt joins us. She's coordinator of the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network. And here in our studio, Crystal Mackay, President, Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, and Ian Affleck, Vice President, Plant Biotechnology at the trade association CropLife Canada. And we are delighted to welcome you two to our program, you again, but actually here for the first time, which is nice, okay? And Lucy, good to have you on again as well. I'm not going to assume that everybody who's watching us right now is an agri-food biotechnology innovative expert. And so we thought this handy-dandy little one-minute explainer on what we're going to talk about might be useful. Sheldon, go.
You might not know this, but every day you reap the benefits of plant breeding. In fact, much of what you eat could not exist without it. Plant breeding started many thousands of years ago when people first domesticated wild plants. By selecting the best plants and breeding them over time, ancient farmers cultivated crops that were ever tastier, more nutritious, and more resilient. As scientists like Gregor Mendel began to discover how plant characteristics are passed from one generation to the next, they laid the foundation for our modern understanding of plant genetics. As the years went by, scientists' understanding of agriculture continued to progress. In the 20th century, we made incredible breakthroughs in understanding the mechanics of genetics, DNA, the genetic code, and how to read whole genomes. Each advance increased the efficiency of breeding better crops.
Okay, Ian, get us started. Help us understand this better. Adjusting the genetics of crops. What are some of the most common techniques used?
Some of the most common in the conventional space are just crossing two plants to try to get the desired characteristic of one to move into the other or to create something desirable. There's also mutagenesis, which is part of this gene editing conversation that we're having.
Mutagenesis.
Mutagenesis.
You want to use your funny line now or no?
Yeah. Is that when Peter Gabriel left the band, or?
That's just Genesis.
It was the early greatest hits album.
Early.
But it's commonly used in breeding programs across the scale. And then there's the rDNA, which is GMOs, which is commonly talked about. I think that's in the more popular vernacular. And then we get to gene editing, which is a whole other suite of tools. So if you think about them as all different drawers in the toolbox of a plant breeder, they're picking and choosing from all these different drawers and then using that alongside computing technology and statistics in order to create.
And how much of what's going on in Ontario right now would you say is affected in this way somehow?
I think the things talked about the most, the three major crops, are canola, corn, and soybean. And they all have rDNA technology, or GMOs, so to speak. And that's used in about 80 to 90% of all corn, soybean, and canola acreage, where farmers have adopted those technologies because of the benefits they provide.
So we may not know it, but it's happening out there a lot.
It's definitely happening out there a lot, and I think it's there to be known, and we're trying to help educate in that space.
Okay, let's do another clip here, again, just to sort of get everybody up to scratch. Jennifer Doudna, University of California, Berkeley, one of the creators of the Crispr gene editing technique, and here she explains a little bit about how that works. Sheldon, thank you.
Scientists have appreciated for a long time that once we understood the DNA sequence in cells, if we had a tool that would allow easy manipulation of that sequence, that would be a very powerful kind of technology. CRISPR is a technology for changing the sequence of DNA in cells in a precise fashion. So the way the CRISPR technology works is by the action of a protein called Cas9 that functions like a molecular scalpel for DNA. It's a very exciting technology that's going to do a lot of good in human society and for human health. It stretches from human therapeutics to agricultural applications to thinking about how do we make better biofuels.
Okay, and Ian, one more time. These recent developments and how they might affect what we see on our grocery shelves.
I think there's a lot of great opportunities that this tool provides the plant breeder, and they can pull it out of that toolbox. I think we'll see more products that are focused on some consumer demands, whether it be how long things last on the shelf, higher nutrient values, or there's a company in the US called Calyx that's working on some high fiber wheat. So it'd be easier for a consumer to get their fiber intake in a day without having to alter the diet that they were going to eat. You'll just have more high fiber foods. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for this to provide those benefits, and also to provide benefits, continued benefits to the farmer that's always looking for ways to farm more sustainably and efficiently on their farm, whether it's in Ontario or anywhere else in the world.
Here's what Chemical and Engineering News has to say about this. Using CRISPR, what we just saw, using CRISPR to add or remove a plant trait is faster, more precise, easier, and in most cases, cheaper than either traditional breeding techniques or older genetic engineering methods. Okay, Crystal, let me get you to weigh in on this now. How important is this discussion is the claim that gene editing, in most cases, is the less costly way to change a plant's characteristics?
Well, our big picture goal is to feed people, right? We're in the business of feeding people first and caring for the environment and sustainably, more food, less land. So the opportunities with technology like CRISPR to give people healthy, affordable food and more of it efficiently is win-win on both sides.
Is there any downside to what we're describing so far?
Well, like all new technology, our number one priority is to make sure that it's safe, right? So the end product, what I feed my children, I need to be sure that that's safe. So I think in Canada, we have an extremely responsible regulatory system. So as long as the end product is safe, if we go back to Ian's analogy of there's a toolbox of toolkit of options on how we get to that food product, I want to know that the food at the end of the supply chain is safe for me and my family. And once we know that, then of course there's many other elements such as environment, et cetera, that we will look at.
Lucy, let me get you in at this point here. Do you think gene editing is a better approach to improving our food supply?
Well, there's no doubt that this is a powerful new set of techniques of genetic engineering, and it's very exciting science in the lab. But I think it would be a mistake to transfer that excitement and that new understanding, because it still does have limitations, too quickly into a technology in the field. And this is what we saw with genetic engineering before now. And we also want to make sure that we're not overhyping the technology. Certainly, we might see a lot more genetically engineered plants and animals. We need to have a bigger discussion about whether we need these or what use these new plants and animals will actually serve, and who owns them, who makes the decision about how the technology is used.
You say there are limitations to what we've been describing so far. What do you see as those limitations?
Well, there's still a lot of science to be done about what it means when we are genetically engineering these organisms, even with these new techniques. Certainly, the techniques such as CRISPR-Cas can be used to make new characteristics in organisms, and there's a new level of precision in where that cut in the DNA can be made, but there's a lot more research about what it means when that cut is made. The repair mechanism of the organism is now in charge, and a lot can happen. There can be unintended effects, and this is the role of regulation. This is why regulation for safety is so important, but it's also why we also need to make sure that if we're using this technology, that it's also necessary. It's not the only technology available to us to create plants and animals that we may want and need.
Let's introduce one more voice to our discussion here tonight on TVO. In Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, we welcome Stuart Smythe. He is the Agri-Food Innovation Chair at the University of Saskatchewan. And Stuart, we're glad you could join us, and perhaps you could weigh in on where you are on this debate.
Thank you for the invitation to participate today. I'm really looking forward. This is a really exciting time in science and agriculture, and I think genome editing offers a vast potential to do very targeted changes to plant varieties that are going to help varieties cope in the rapidly changing environment facing global warming. So I think that plant breeders have an incredible opportunity at hand to make really quick changes that can help both farmers produce high level of yields and keep food prices stable and constant through ensuring that there is adequate amounts of food available to feed the world, as Crystal was saying earlier.
Okay, you heard what Lucy had to say about some of her concerns. Do you share any of those concerns?
No, not really, because we have fantastic scientists regulating the technology in Canada, and they've been doing so for 30 years. The development of the regulatory system in Canada started in 1988, and there hasn't been a single documented issue of any safety concerns. So I think this time we need to dial the regulations back. This is just gene-specific mutagenesis, and we've been using mutagenesis to develop crop varieties since the 1930s. So to argue for more regulations now is just a way of preventing innovation in agriculture, which is really frustrating from a science perspective.
Lucy, got to let you comment on that before we go on.
Well, I think actually regulation enables innovation. If we're really going to invest in a future for gene editing, then in fact the techniques, the products need to be regulated properly and more transparently. We need more public science and we need more independent science, and this is just a benefit to the ongoing scientific investigation, our ongoing understanding of how genetics work.
Lucy, let me get you to follow up with something that we mentioned right at the very top of our discussion, which was this court ruling in Europe, the European Court of Justice, which ruled that gene-edited food products, what we've been talking about so far, are going to be treated in the same manner as they have been treating GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Why do you think the court decided to treat those two things in the same way?
Well, the European Court of Justice was just following the definition of GMO, genetically modified organism, in Europe, which is this altering of genetic material in a way that doesn't occur naturally by mating or natural recombination. And we're using the terms genetic modification and genetic engineering interchangeably here. So Europe, really, this court decision just means that as new techniques of genetic engineering, these gene-edited techniques will be regulated as such. And it now means that Canada needs to be a bit more explicit in how we, at least for the export market, define and trace these technologies. Of course, they're not labeled for Canadians, but it does have implications now. In the US, for example, there is no regulation of gene-edited products or genetic engineering specifically, at least for environmental purposes. So North America now has to catch up with the technology, and this is always the case, that regulation lags behind the transformation of a new science into technology in the field.
Stuart, how would you interpret the court's decision?
Well, I think it's going to drive the remaining amount of agriculture R&D out of Europe. 20 years ago, Europe received 1/3 of the global ag R&D investment, and 2 years ago it was down to less than 9%. So it's great news for Canada and North America, because we get all their top scientists, their PhD students, and research laboratories are moving from European institutions and universities to Canadian and American universities. So I think this is just really going to slam the door on the remaining little bit of ag R&D that's left in Europe, and it's great news for North America. It's really bad news for European farmers, because they're going to lose access to new technologies and new varieties of germplasm that just simply aren't going to be developed in Europe. But from a North American perspective, this is good news, and so we need to make sure that our regulatory system is as minimal as possible in this technology, because it's just simply an extension of technology that's been used for 80 years, and it's not regulated now, and so there's no need to develop an extensive regulatory framework for something that's presently not regulated.
Okay, let me get Crystal's take on this. The impact you think this European court decision will have on Canadian farmers?
Well, I think it introduces another element of uncertainty, right? When a major trading partner, and we're in a global breadbasket, obviously, of which Canada is a major player in terms of supply, not population. When a major player announces something huge like this in terms of a shift and what that means, it just puts a big question mark in front of Canadian farmers. To Stuart's point, I think the fact that we have amazing farmers, we have innovators, we have farmers that are interested in science, investing in it themselves in our own public institutions, that's all positive, but this global marketplace that we live in, this is putting a question mark on it for sure.
Stuart seems to think that I'm going to make up a term here, the agri-brainiacs of Europe are going to be so disappointed with that result that they're going to come over here and we'll be the beneficiaries of that. Do you see that?
So, well, I absolutely see the shift of science coming to North America. I agree with Stuart 100% there. I think on the science side, that's absolutely true. But we are feeding people, and we're feeding people globally, right? We are a big breadbasket here in Canada. We feed a lot of other countries. So whenever a major trading partner puts an announcement like this out, it sends alarm bells to Canadian farmers to say, what's the future of our export markets?
And I think Lucy is absolutely correct that this is a legal interpretation of the current wording of their current regulations. So there's been no acknowledgement by the EU as to what their policies will be in the future, and the timeline is not expected to get clarity on that till 2019, maybe even 2020. So what that creates is this uncertainty in Europe about how will they regulate this at the end of the day. Will they adopt this opinion full force? Will they rewrite the regulations to maybe, as Stuart mentioned, take into consideration 30 years of regulatory science and a 60-year history of plant breeding in this area, and then adopt a more rational approach? So our fingers are crossed that it's the latter, that we'll see a more rational approach, but the fear in the meantime in the science community will be driving that investment elsewhere.
While your fingers are crossed, and since you brought up the issue of fear, let me follow up with this. You remember there was, of course, as there still is, a big debate about how much labeling ought to go onto GMO products, genetically modified organisms. A lot of people who swear by them, who think they're absolutely safe, who think there's no problem at all, still would rather not have the labeling on them because they say that introduces in the mind of the consumer some level of suspicion that ought not to be there. Are we going to do the same thing with gene-edited foods? Should we put the labeling on from the beginning and, in effect, I guess, try to avoid some of the problems that have happened with GMOs?
I think the public debate on GMOs is definitely unfortunate when they do provide the amount of benefits that they provide and the safety that's there, which is attested by Health Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, governments around the world. Gene editing will certainly undergo a similar debate, but I think the same principle stands.
So no labeling then?
I think labeling should be focused on health and safety, which this is not, and you don't want to clutter up labels for the consumer. That doesn't give them information that helps them make safe and nutritious choices. It just gives them more things they have to try to sift through on a label.
Let me get Lucy's take on the whole issue of labeling on gene-edited foods and whether we ought to take the same approach we did with GMOs.
Well, absolutely. These are genetically engineered organisms, and for 20 years, polls consistently show that over 80% of Canadians want to know where genetically engineered, genetically modified foods are in grocery store shelves for whatever reason that they want to have that information.
Do you think consumers, Crystal, want that information?
Well, I'm going to argue both sides just to be difficult and say consumers want transparency and they want accuracy in their food. So I am seeing some pushback to labels now, sub-in, gluten-free, non-GMO, you know, the list goes on, that Canadians are saying, why are you putting GMO-free water and charging me more? So we are seeing a little pushback there. The call for openness and transparency, absolutely. The challenge is when we're dealing with these technical topics, to Lucy's point, yes, 80% say they want labels on genetically engineered foods. 80% also say they want labels of foods that contain DNA, which is everything, obviously. So, you know, we're dealing with these technical topics and how much space do you put on the label. So my business at the Centre for Food Integrity is let's have an open, honest, transparent conversation with Canadians and give them credible information, how much you can achieve on a label when we're in this skeptical consumer era of I don't want to be duped, don't put a label on to charge me more.
No, I get you, but I guess we should hear from Stuart on this. Stuart, I gather this is called absence labeling. People don't only want to know what's in the product, they want to know what's not in the product. What's your view on whether that ought to be done for gene-edited foods?
Well, when you ask consumers to think of a label and ask them what piece of information is lacking, only about 3% bring up GM. So I think it's quite clear that consumers really just want safe, nutritious, and cheap food. And Canada's done an exceptionally good job of providing that. And so providing additional labeling information really doesn't get to the point. I think if they're going to label foods through genome editing, then they need to label all the organic foods and put the process on there and say whether they were developed by chemical or radiation mutagenesis as well. And then you've got a level playing field so consumers can make a decision based on information.
Lucy, is that a fair point?
Well, no, it's not. I mean, organic production is already got its own label, but more importantly, I don't think we can have a genuine discussion about educating consumers or public information if in fact the products of the technology are hidden from view. And this is particularly stark at the moment when Canadians are eating the world's first genetically modified animal, a GM Atlantic salmon, and many people don't know that it's on the market. No one knows where it is. And it's just clear that people have been asking continually for this labeling. It's just one way that the technology is hidden from the public, or a public debate is being obstructed rather than enabled. And really, for such a powerful technology, if we're really saying that it could have benefits, then we need to know where it is, and we need to have a discussion together about, is this technology necessary, what is it, or the basic of where is it?
Ian, I should get your take on this so-called absence labeling and whether you understand how marketing of food works. Is it useful to market food by saying what's not in it, as in it's non-GMO or it's not gene-edited?
Absence labeling is effective in today's marketing environment, absolutely. I think the number of stickers you can have on something that says what's not in it, it signals an apparent value, which unfortunately many times isn't there. But I think, again, I agree with transparency. We want to educate the public. Health Canada recently did a study which supports exactly what Lucy said, that 80% of the public wants labeling, but they asked the following question, which was, so why do you want labeling? And they said, well, we don't know anything about GMOs. So the label's not going to give them the information that they want. It's just if it's the only option for more information is a label, they're asking for it. So the key here, and I think with what Crystal's doing, is how do we have that conversation? How do we get that information out? Like we talked on the top of the show, that 90% of soybeans, canola, corn are biotechnology, or the Atlantic salmon. That's well publicized information that it is there. Now the products aren't labeled directly, but the information is there, and the conversation, I think, is happening, and it's happening in many different forms.
New Scientist magazine had an article about the health benefits of some newly developed crops, which included this quote. Sheldon, if you wouldn't mind, let's bring this graphic up. Virtually every genetically modified crop on the market is designed to help the farmer who grows it rather than the person who eats it. Now, that's starting to change. Let's weigh in on this. Crystal, are attitudes about genetically modified foods likely to change if the foods have health benefits as opposed to financial benefits?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've probably got 10 years worth of research on Canadian consumers that show if you can show what's in it for me, literally in this case, I want healthier food, more affordable, more choices with benefits, for sure. That is top of mind. Environmental benefits would be a second. Definitely, a distant second, I would say.
Ian.
And I think that's an area where it's the consumer-focused foods creates a connection with the consumer to the technology, and that's what's missing, as you said, in the things that are focused on the farmer. However, what we're trying to do a better job of getting out to the public is, although it's designed, many of them, to help the farmer more efficiently and sustainably run their operation, the downstream effects of that are better environmental conditions on the farm, a more sustainable farm, less greenhouse gas emissions, more affordable prices for food. So there is benefits to the consumer. It's just a little harder to create that connection. And the dialogue that Lucy and Crystal talk about is how we get that information out to the public. And I think over the last 20 years, we've only really started putting an effort into that public communication campaign in recent years.
All right, let me get Lucy's take on this. Lucy, if the nature of the debate changes from what's financially good for the farmer to what's actually in the interest of the health of the consumer, does that change any of what we're talking about here?
Well, it could if consumers also know where those products are. Of course, they'll be told a health benefit or a health claim, but not that that product is a product of genetic engineering. And I think we need to be a little aware that we're hearing about a public campaign and public education from CropLife, which of course represents Syngenta and Bayer, the big companies. And also, actually the Center for Food Integrity is also funded by these companies, CropLife, Syngenta, and Bayer. And, this level of control over information, or the fact that a lot of the so-called education is happening in association with the companies that really are getting bigger and bigger through mergers. And this is the context for the introduction of this technology, is still that there's an amazing, unprecedented amount of corporate consolidation in the seed and pesticide market. We see 4 companies own over half of the global seed and pesticide market. And so we really need more independent, more publicly funded information, and that has to come along with mandatory labeling.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fair point to point out where everybody's money is coming from. So let's complete the circle. The Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, which you represent, where does your funding come from?
Yeah, so we get individual donations, some foundation money, and also we do get some money from health food companies and some small organic food companies.
Now, I mean, obviously, I think you want the viewer to infer that because many corporations are funding their activities, we should be suspicious of what they're saying today. Should we be equally suspicious of what you're saying today because of who's backing you?
I didn't say suspicious. I mean, I think we just need to know that these companies have a lot of money, and when companies talk about education about the technology and their products, they're doing so when consumers are at a disadvantage, when the government does not institute labeling, nor does it track where the technologies are. And so really the public is at a disadvantage. And if we're to finish the circle of transparency, then also, Dr. Smythe also, in addition to all his other work, also holds an industry-funded agri-food innovation chair funded by Syngenta and Bayer. And it's just part of the reality of these new technologies that the companies have money to support research. And this is why we need the government to be stepping in and providing more money for public research. And I think everyone agrees that we need more publicly funded research. And this would also enable the public debate that is just hobbled by a lack of information, a lack of transparency.
I have to let Stuart come back in on that. And Stuart, I'll let you in by asking you to respond to the issue of whether or not the fact that corporations are funding both your chair and our two guests' work here in the studio. Lucy doesn't use the word suspicious, but I'll use it. Should we be therefore suspicious of what comes out of your mouths today?
No, my chair's governed by the guidelines for public-private research chairs. There's dozens of these research chairs in universities across the country. There's guidelines about control over information, control over data. And I think it's just typically a scare tactic by those opposed to innovation in agriculture and in science more broadly, that these types of concerns would start to come into play. These chairs have been around for decades, where industry and universities are collaborating together, and that's something that's encouraged by the government.
But Stuart, she also said, sorry for jumping in, she also said that it'd be in everybody's interest to see more publicly funding of research in this area. You're on side with that, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. In an ideal world, we'd love to see Agriculture Canada get more funding and funding available for universities.
Okay. On that note of consensus, then, with time running out, I'm going to move on. And Stuart, let me get you to deal with the issue of how you think Canada's regulatory system is going to deal with all of this gene editing food products that we've been talking about.
I think the decision by the USDA to treat CRISPR technologies as just simple plant breeding is really the way for Canada to go. We have so much harmonization between Canada and the States that if Canada wants to maintain its high level of innovation investment, we're going to need to align our regulatory guidelines with the USDA decision and just treat this as conventional plant breeding and not make it subject to additional regulations and to ensure we have a level playing field with the Americans and consumers are happily consuming the food that's out there. So I think let's just continue with what we've got and consumers have a very high level of trust in our regulatory agencies, so they know that the products on the market shelf are safe.
Well, let's see. Lucy, is Health Canada's testing process adequate in your view?
Well, Health Canada does not do any testing. No government agency tests the products of genetic engineering as part of a regulatory process, a risk assessment process. In fact, the science behind regulatory decisions, for the most part, is confidential business information, which means that Canadians do not have access to it. It's information presented to the government by the companies or institutions that own the genetically modified organism that want to put the food on the market. And most of that science, if not all, depending on the case, is not peer-reviewed science. So it's not part of the scientific literature globally. And as critiqued by the Royal Society of Canada's expert panel so many years ago, really, without peer review, it's difficult to really see the integrity of that science, that it doesn't actually meet the definition of science, strictly speaking. So we have a long way to go.
The CFIA reviewed every single study
regulation.
All the data that was submitted by the companies for a decade, and after a decade of research, the CFIA could not determine any difference between what was submitted and what the CFIA studies found, so they found it was a waste of money to duplicate the studies, and they stopped doing it. So we have a decade of CFIA regulatory knowledge that the risk assessment data is accurate and bang on.
Krista, let me get your take on whether you think the mix of Health Canada's involvement, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's involvement, whether Canadians in general have confidence in that process.
I would say our trust in our actual food grown in Canada and the people that grow it is quite strong. There's a bit of a question mark around the trust in government and food safety and the process and the regulations, mostly because we don't know. So the Canadian consumer is looking for, I don't know about the background on what it takes, but I want to know that that apple that I'm about to eat is safe, and they have good trust in that piece. What we're talking about is a lot of backstory that happens to get to the food. So they want to know that the end inspection of their food that they're eating is actually safe.
I mean, Ian, every now and then we have seen a story in the media about, a problem, listeria, whatever. This does happen from time to time. How would you gauge Canadians' confidence, not just in the safety of the food, but in the process by which it gets onto our shelves?
And I think we do see those things when it comes to food safety matters like listeria, but that's in an area where there's a known risk, where these foodborne illnesses exist. In the 30 years that we've had biotechnology on the shelf and going through the regulatory system, there has never been not only a problem when the product comes to market, nor a problem found through the assessments of the CFIA and Health Canada. And to Lucy's point, I think both the CFIA and Health Canada have been very clear that we don't need to track or label these products, because once the review is done, they're considered exactly the same as everything else that's on the shelf. And they're very transparent with that, and they speak about how their regulatory system works. So I think that information is out there, but I think it is an underlying element of, and this is a bit challenging, where at the beginning of the conversation we talked about, we just want labeling to know where it is. When I think as we went further in the conversation, many of the organizations that are calling for this actually have a long history of just opposing innovation in that space.
I wonder if there is consensus among this group on the BC apples known as Arctic apples, and whether that is an unambiguously agricultural biotech success story. Ian, why don't you start the story? We've got just a few minutes here, so start the story and tell us what those are.
Very exciting new technology. So it's more of a classical GMO, if you will, but it's an apple where they've dialed down the browning. So when you cut an apple open and it goes brown, that's just because the juices almost, it's a rusting type action in the air, and that's what turns that surface brown. So by turning down one little part of that juice, it no longer browns. It doesn't change the nutrition of the apple, doesn't change the speed at which it decomposes. It just simply makes it stay fresh longer. So if you want to cut it up for your kids' lunches, like I do for my son the night before, you could leave it in the fridge and it won't be brown in the morning. So it reduces food waste, makes it an easier snack.
Okay, let me get Lucy in on this. Lucy, the Okanagan Specialty Fruits Group, I gather, have undertaken an educational initiative related to this. Tell us about that. Well,
the company is promoting its apple as, a benefit to the consumers. I would say that as a project of genetic engineering, it is a failure because it's just unnecessary. And both farmers and consumers in Canada have largely said so. There's been a big controversy over the apple because this question of a non-browning apple can be solved by all kinds of other technologies, many of which we use all the time, including at home with lemon juice. So putting resources behind this technology, the company promotes it as a consumer-friendly technology that would mean we don't have to commit to a whole apple. Really, in reality, what this has meant so far, and it's not yet sold as food in Canada, it's in plastic bags in the United States as sliced apples. And really, if we're to look at the question of food waste, we need to do that really together as a society and not allow individual corporations to promote their products out of context. And that's what they've been doing. And they've been claiming, excitement on part of consumers. And yet, of course, there's no labeling. This is the same thing we see with the GM salmon, where the company says, this is a great success, people love it. People have no idea what's on the market. And people ask us all the time, am I eating an apple? Or actually they call to say, I cut an apple, is this genetically modified? So we do need to give people real information, not just from as Ian had said, you know, the information is out there somewhere.
Okay,
That
we're going to,
means,
forgive
you know,
me, I'm going to
somebody
jump
else
in
is
here because we're
controlling
about to
that
lose our satellite feeds to both of you, and I don't want to do that without having a chance to say so long. And thanks for participating. Stuart Smythe, Agri-Food Innovation Chair, University of Saskatchewan. Lucy Sherritt, the coordinator from the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network. We thank you, too, for being there for us in Saskatoon and Halifax, respectively. And Ian Affleck, CropLife Canada, Crystal Mackay, Canadian Centre for Food Integrity. We're grateful you could spare time for us in our studio here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.